The stage lights of Britain's Got Talent were merciless that night. Sharp beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating every nervous tremor and every hopeful glance. When Sydnie Christmas walked out, the air in the theater shifted. There was something about her presence, raw and unpolished, that drew the audience's eyes before she had even opened her mouth. She wasn't dressed like the polished contestants who came before her. There was an edge in her walk, a storm behind her smile, as if she knew this performance could either be her salvation or her destruction. The judges eyed her with skepticism at first. Simon Cowell leaned back, his arms folded, prepared to deliver one of his infamous verbal executions. Amanda Holden offered a polite smile, while Alicia Dixon's expression carried curiosity mixed with doubt. To them, Sydnie was another face in the endless parade of hopefuls who believed they had what it took to defy the odds. But when the first note left her lips, doubt shattered. Her voice wasn't just powerful, it was haunting, carrying with it the weight of 1,000 unshed tears. The audience erupted. Some stood to their feet mid-performance, unable to resist the force that seemed to ripple from her every breath. By the time she reached the final crescendo, there was no trace of hesitation left in the room. It was as though the theater itself trembled with her. Simon's eyebrow arched, the corners of his lips twitching into an expression rarely seen, a mixture of surprise and reluctant admiration. He knew, as did everyone in that room, that Sydnie Christmas wasn't just another contestant. She was a storm disguised as a songbird. But fame has a cruel way of twisting victories into chains. As the applause echoed around her, Sydnie stood frozen, a flicker of fear cutting through the triumph. For the world, this was the beginning of her ascent. For her, it was the start of a war she wasn't prepared to fight. Backstage, producers swarmed her with questions, cameras, and contracts. The machine had smelled fresh talent, and it was ready to devour. Interviews were lined up, photo shoots scheduled, stylists brought in to reshape her into a marketable figure. Charisma, they repeated, loving the irony of her surname. You've got the voice, you've got the look, we'll make you a star. But Sydnie wasn't blind. She saw the hunger in their eyes. They didn't see her as a person. They saw profit, a product to be packaged, sold, and discarded when the shine wore off. In the days that followed, her audition clip went viral. Millions clicked, shared, and commented. Social media crowned her the next sensation, a girl who had clawed her way into the limelight. Strangers began to weave narratives about her life, guessing at her struggles, romanticizing her pain. To the world, Sydnie became a symbol of hope, proof that talent could break through. But in the silence of her dressing room, the applause faded into a ringing void. She stared at herself in the mirror, wondering if the girl looking back was already gone. The attention came with claws. For every fan who adored her, there were dozens of voices spewing venom online. Comments cut deep. Her looks, her background, her accent, her very right to stand on that stage. At first, she told herself she didn't care. But words have a way of burrowing under the skin, resurfacing in the quiet hours when the lights are off and the world forgets to cheer. Fame had handed her a crown, but it was made of thorns. As the competition progressed, Sydnie's performances grew more intense, more desperate. Every note seemed like a plea, every lyric a battle cry. She wasn't just singing songs, she was bleeding on stage, carving her pain into melodies that left audiences breathless. Judges praised her, critics wrote of her unmatched authenticity, and fans wept watching her. But behind the curtain, the cost was mounting. She rehearsed until her voice cracked, pushed her body past exhaustion, and smiled through interviews while her hands trembled. Her rivals noticed the cracks. Whispers circulated backstage. "She looks tired," one contestant muttered. "She's burning out," said another. Some pitied her, others smirked at the thought of her collapse. In the ruthless world of reality TV, weakness was blood in the water, and there were plenty of sharks waiting to strike. By the semi-finals, Sydnie had become the face of the season. But with every step forward, the shadows of her past grew louder. Tabloids dug into her life with surgical cruelty, unearthing family tensions, financial struggles, and rumors she'd fought hard to keep buried. Old acquaintances surfaced, some selling stories for a quick profit, others twisting the truth to feed the media frenzy. She felt hunted, her private life torn apart for entertainment. The night of the finals came, and Sydney stepped onto the stage knowing the weight of millions pressed on her shoulders. She delivered a performance so raw it left the judges speechless, the audience in tears. Yet when the results were announced, victory slipped through her fingers. Another act claimed the crown. The cameras caught her smile, her gracious applause, the congratulatory hug she offered her rival. But once the lights dimmed and the cameras turned away, her smile collapsed. She hadn't just lost a competition, she had lost the fragile thread that had been holding her together. For the world, Sydnie Charisma's journey on Britain's Got Talent ended with dignity. For her, it ended with a wound that would never heal. She had tasted the peak of applause, but she had also glimpsed the abyss waiting below. And as the crowd moved on to the next sensation, Sydney was left in the shadows, alone with her demons and the echo of her own voice. Fame doesn't vanish the moment the cameras stop rolling. It lingers, clinging like smoke to everything it touches. For Sydnie Charisma, leaving Britain's Got Talent was like stepping off a cliff with no safety net. The roar of applause faded overnight, but the scrutiny only grew louder. Journalists swarmed her, tabloids twisted her story, and online vultures dissected every frame of her performances, searching for flaws to feast upon. At first, she clung to the high. Interviews poured in, and producers whispered promises of stardom. She was invited onto morning shows, her name printed across glossy magazines, her voice replayed endlessly on YouTube. But behind every smile on camera was exhaustion. Behind every styled photo was the weight of a girl who didn't recognize her own reflection anymore. Managers she had never met before appeared with contracts that stretched pages long. They spoke in velvet tones about record deals, tours, and brand building. All Sydney heard was the sound of shackles clinking. The industry was a machine, and Sydney had been thrown into its grinding gears. She was told what to wear, how to speak, even how to laugh. One executive demanded she tone down her natural grit, telling her she needed to look more marketable. Another insisted her songs needed to be rewritten to fit the charts, stripping away the very pain that had made her stand out. The voice that once carried her truth was being reshaped into something artificial, something hollow. But saying no was never an option. If she resisted, there was always another hungry contestant waiting to take her place. The pressure built with each passing week. Long studio hours bled into rehearsals, rehearsals into staged interviews. Sleep became a luxury she could no longer afford. Energy drinks replaced meals, pills replaced rest. Friends who once supported her drifted away, unable to understand the whirlwind she was caught in. Her phone buzzed constantly, not with messages of comfort, but with demands, deadlines, and relentless criticism. Then came the trolls. Fame had opened doors, but it had also painted a target on her back. Online abuse became a daily reality. Some mocked her looks, calling her a fraud, claiming she had no future. Others dug deeper, cruelly targeting her family, her upbringing, her struggles. The anonymity of the internet gave strangers the power to stab at her soul without consequence. She read the words late at night, scrolling endlessly as the poison seeped in. Worthless. Fake. Pathetic. Each insult carved deeper until she began to believe them. Her shows after BGT brought no solace. Small concerts and TV spots felt like interrogations under blinding lights. Fans wanted perfection but never saw the sleepless nights or the breakdowns backstage. Every slip was seized as proof she didn't belong. The deepest betrayals came not from strangers but from those closest to her. Family demanded debts repaid, old friends reappeared to claim her success. She couldn't tell who cared for her and who cared for her fame. Trust, once her anchor, began to vanish. Rumors spread that she was difficult. Producers called her unstable, too emotional, unreliable. These lies justified their control, twisting her defiance into evidence of her downfall. The very strength that had won her the stage was now used against her. Alone at night, she collapsed in her apartment, singing only to the walls. But even her voice, once her escape, had become a burden, a reminder of the freedom she had lost. Her body faltered, weight fluctuations, panic attacks, exhaustion. Doctors begged her to slow down, but in the industry, slowing meant being forgotten. So she smiled for cameras while breaking inside. The machine didn't care. Fans cheered, critics speculated, and the cycle spun on. What began as a dream had become a labyrinth. Sydnie Charisma wasn't just fighting the industry. She was fighting herself, trapped between the girl she was and the product she had become. Every night she replayed her audition in her mind, the one pure moment when her voice had stunned the world. But that girl felt like a stranger now, a ghost haunting her from a past she could never return to. The spotlight, once her beacon, had become her prison. And though the audience had moved on, Sydnie was still shackled in the glow, trying to find herself in the darkness it left behind. By the time Sydnie Charisma's name began slipping out of headlines, the damage had already been done. The world had moved on to fresher talent, but she was still staggering under the weight of broken promises and scars the audience would never see. Fame hadn't simply faded, it had turned on her, chewing her up and spitting her out like every other casualty of reality television. But unlike many who quietly disappeared, Sydnie's descent was messy, brutal, and public. The first signs of collapse came with the failed record deal. She had been paraded into boardrooms, signed under bright smiles and handshakes, only to discover her big break was a cage. The label wanted control of everything: her lyrics, her image, even her social media posts. When she fought back, they shelved her project, burying songs she had poured her soul into. Months of work disappeared with a single email. No explanations, no apologies. She had become a liability to the very people who once called her the future. It was around this time the paparazzi grew crueler. They followed her to late-night bars, caught her stumbling on cracked sidewalks, published photos of her clutching cigarettes with haunted eyes. Headlines screamed, from BGT darling to disaster, reveling in her unraveling. The tabloids weren't content with reporting. They manufactured scandal, twisting fragments of truth into sensationalized lies. One claimed she was addicted, another that she was suicidal, a third that she had been secretly hospitalized. Sydnie stopped correcting them. What was the point? No one wanted her truth. They only wanted her downfall. Her circle shrank to almost nothing. Industry contacts cut ties, unwilling to be associated with a sinking ship. Friends drifted away, tired of her late-night calls filled with tears and rage. Family members resurfaced only to demand money she didn't have. Trust became a foreign word, something she no longer believed in. Each betrayal left her more isolated, until the only constant companions were the shadows in her room and the voices in her head whispering that maybe the critics had been right all along. Then came the relationships, if they could be called that. Sydnie, desperate for something real, gravitated toward people who promised stability but delivered chaos. Lovers who saw her fame as currency, who treated her vulnerability like a toy to be broken. Some used her name for their own ambitions, others drained her emotionally and financially. What should have been sources of comfort turned into battlegrounds of manipulation and betrayal. Every heartbreak deepened the cracks, every toxic romance pulling her further from the person she once was. The spiral accelerated when videos of her breaking down surfaced online. Caught on shaky phone cameras, Sydnie was seen shouting at strangers, sobbing on sidewalks, collapsing in the arms of friends who didn't know how to help. The internet devoured the clips, mocking her pain, turning her most fragile moments into memes. For millions, she had become entertainment again, but this time not for her voice, but for her suffering. It was the cruelest encore imaginable. Her music, once her sanctuary, became another battlefield. She tried releasing songs independently, raw confessions wrapped in haunting melodies. But without industry backing, they were buried under the noise of the market. The few who listened heard her cries, but they were drowned out by the chorus of ridicule. Every upload was met with more hate, more reminders that she was no longer the star she had been. What should have been healing became a reminder of everything she had lost. Mental health battles consumed her. Panic attacks struck without warning, leaving her gasping for air backstage or curled up in dark hotel rooms. Depression wrapped itself around her like chains, pulling her deeper into the abyss. Therapy was a revolving door. Counselors came and went, prescriptions changed hands, but nothing seemed to reach the core of her pain. Some nights she disappeared from the world entirely, leaving fans to speculate, while others she re-emerged with erratic social media posts that raised more concern than comfort. There were flashes of hope, brief performances, viral clips, moments when fans whispered of a comeback. But every spark was smothered by another scandal, another breakdown, another reminder that the industry never forgives. The final blow came when a former manager leaked her private life, contracts, debts, even medical records, for profit. The betrayal was total, her name lighting tabloids again, not for talent, but for collapse. Her fall wasn't just professional. It was personal, spiritual, absolute. The girl who once shook Britain's Got Talent had become unrecognizable. The voice that carried thousands now cracked in silence. The storm was reduced to whispers in the dark. The cruelest part was not her suffering, but how the world watched, indifferent, entertained, even gleeful. Her pain became a spectacle, her downfall a show. Sydnie hadn't simply fallen, she had been broken, torn apart until only fragments of a dream remained. Her last years unraveled slowly. The applause turned to silence, opportunities vanished, and invisibility replaced fame. She drifted between rented rooms, debts, and desperation, selling what little she had. Isolation consumed her, friends gone, family fractured, her only companion the haunting replay of that one perfect audition. Rumors spread, rehab, exile, obscurity. But the truth was more tragic. She wasn't dead, but she wasn't living either. She was surviving, suspended between fragile clarity and crushing despair. Her health deteriorated further. Years of neglect, stress, and substance dependence had carved their toll into her body. Doctors' warnings grew dire. Her heart was weak, her lungs scarred, her voice a shadow of what it had been. The gift that had once been her salvation had been sacrificed to survival. Even when she tried to sing again, her voice cracked, trembling like a broken instrument. Each note was a reminder that the world had taken everything from her, even the one thing it had once loved. And yet, in the strangest twist of cruelty, her legacy began to grow only as her life diminished. Clips of her BGT performances resurfaced on social media, drawing millions of nostalgic views. Fans who had long forgotten her suddenly rediscovered the girl who had once shaken the stage. They shared her videos with captions like, "What happened to her?" or "She deserved better." Strangers mourned a tragedy they didn't understand, romanticizing a downfall they had contributed to. Her suffering became aesthetic, her life reduced to tragic nostalgia. She saw it all. In the dead of night, scrolling through comments, she read the same platitudes over and over. She was so talented. She could have been huge. The industry ruined her. The words stung, not because they were untrue, but because they came too late. Where were these voices when she was begging for help? Where were these defenders when she was drowning in hate, mocked on the very platforms that now celebrated her? Legacy was worthless when you were alive to see it rot. Her final public appearance was a disaster. Invited to a small reunion special celebrating Britain's Got Talent stars through the years, she showed up gaunt, unsteady, her voice rasping as though every breath hurt. The audience clapped politely, but their eyes carried pity, not admiration. When she attempted to sing, her voice cracked on the very first line. Gasps echoed, the band faltered, and for a moment the illusion shattered completely. She finished the song with trembling defiance, but the damage was done. Tabloids tore her apart the next morning, headlines branding her performance a tragedy on stage. They didn't know the tragedy had happened long before. After that night, Sydnie Charisma disappeared from the spotlight forever. No more interviews, no more performances, no more desperate attempts at a comeback. Her silence became her final act of rebellion, a refusal to let the world feed on her pain any longer. For fans, her story ended there, with unanswered questions and fading memories. For Sydnie, it ended in shadows, her voice silenced by a world that had once demanded she sing until she bled. But legends are rarely written in the truth. Years later, her name continues to resurface in dark corners of the internet. Conspiracy theories spread. Some claim she died quietly and was buried without recognition. Others insist she faked her death to escape the spotlight's curse. Still others say she's out there, singing anonymously in small bars, reclaiming her voice in places where no one knows her name. What remains undeniable is the lesson her story carved into the bones of entertainment. The spotlight is not salvation, it is a blade. It cuts deep, it shines bright, and it leaves scars that never heal. Sydnie Charisma's legacy is not in her downfall, nor in the cruelty of the machine that consumed her. It is in the reminder that behind every standing ovation lies the possibility of silence, and behind every rising star lies a shadow waiting to swallow them whole. In the end, Sydnie was both triumph and tragedy. A voice that once brought the world to its feet, and a life that proved how quickly the world will let you fall. Her name may fade, her story may twist into myth, but the truth lingers like a haunting chorus. Sydnie Charisma did not die on stage, but the stage is where her soul was broken. And long after the applause has faded, the echoes of her pain still linger, warning anyone who dares to chase the light. If Sydnie Charisma's tragic journey shook you, don't let her story fade into silence. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you never miss another untold story hidden behind the spotlight.